Hey everybody, great to be back. Glad to be back here again. I'm going to admit I'm going to use today's devotional so that I can also test the audio so that on Sunday, hopefully we won't have the audio issues that we had last week. I think I got it all figured out. We'll know for sure, hopefully today after all this. We're going to continue with our devotional today with the story of Joshua and kind of the next step. If you remember, this has been 2 weeks now, so I'll remind you a little bit. The last time we had Joshua, they just crossed over the Jordan. They were in the promised land. And Joshua made the Israelites erect a monument, a circle in the stones, so that they would remember what happened. And they would remember the journey, and they would know that this was where they actually got to the promised land. A big momentous moment, okay, for the people. Now we're going to talk about the individuals. Because our next bit here, we're going to move on here to chapter 5 of the book of Joshua. And start here with verse 2. Just to kind of get to where we need to. At the time, the Lord said to Joshua, "Make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again." So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites at Gibeath Haraloth. That's a place. I don't know how to say it. Now this is why he did so. All those who came out of Egypt, all the men of military age, died in the desert on their way after leaving Egypt. All the people that came out had been circumcised, but all the people born in the desert during the journey from Egypt had not. The Israelites had moved about in the desert 40 years, until all the men who were military age when they left Egypt had died, since they had not obeyed the Lord. For the Lord had sworn to them that they would not see the land that he had solemnly promised their fathers to give them, a land flowing with milk and honey. So he raised up their sons in their place, and these were the ones Joshua circumcised. They were still uncircumcised before because they had not been circumcised on the way. And after the whole nation had been circumcised, they remained where they were in camp until they were healed. And that takes us through verse 8. This is a great kind of reminder. And I like this because you got to remember what circumcision was in the Old Testament. It was the sign of the promise. It was the thing that God told Abraham to do, to his sons and to himself, to physically mark the covenant that God had made with him and his people. During the time that the Israelites, they marched out of Egypt and they wandered in the desert for 40 years, that generation never saw the promised land. Those people that first walked out never saw the promised land. Partially because they were unfaithful, partially because God wanted to start fresh. And this was his moment where they all kind of renewed that covenant. It was important. It was important because these people had fallen away from that practice while in the desert. It made sense. It was logistical. They didn't want to do any kind of procedure like this that would that might slow the group down or might get someone left behind. It made sense, but now they were in the promised land. They were doing the things that God had promised would happen. So it was time for them to renew that promise, and it was time for God to renew the promise to them. And I can't help but think this as I read through this today, that how many times have I been obedient to what God has wanted me to do? Okay, I'm on board, God. You tell me what you want. I'll do it. I'll do whatever you want me to do. I'm on board. And then time passes. And you start to forget those kind of things. You forget that why you're doing it isn't because it makes you money, or it makes you feel good, or because you promised someone that you would. Those tasks that you take on for the sake of God, you have to remind yourself that you're doing it because of God's love and your love for God. Renew that commitment. We get that in the New Testament when Jesus comes and he tells us that we need to be baptized. We need to be born again in God's eyes. That we need to accept the love and forgiveness of God the Father. So it's important for us, even though that's a monumental moment in our lives as Christians, that we give up our sin for the love of God. We accept Jesus into our hearts, as the saying goes. We are freed. We are full of salvation. We are on our way to heaven. But then we have the rest of our lives to live here on earth too. And it's important, occasionally, to be reminded of that, to think back on that moment of salvation, to think back why we are on the path that we were on. That's what the Israelites did when they got to the promised land. Life had been hard for them. that it was time for them to renew. It was time for them to remember. Take time. Take time in your walk to remember who God is to you and how God works in your life. Don't ever forget how important it was to give your life to Christ that first time. Remember it every day. Remember it every time you get a chance. That you are now saved through the grace of Christ. You should never forget that. Thank you all for sticking with me. Share this with everybody you can, everybody you know. I'm hoping the audio issue is better. It sounds good to me right now, so I'm hoping it's going to be good for Sunday, and we'll get the sermon posted Sunday mid-afternoon. If you haven't made it back to church yet, we do miss you. We understand. We know that sickness is still out there, and there's only so much that we can do. And we hope to see you when it's safe for you to return. In the meantime, let me know if we need any prayer requests, if we need any visits, if we need anything that church can provide to you whatsoever. Let me know. I'll be happy to help out. Thank you all, and we will see you soon. God bless.